usually, as curators of a museum, this is probably what you think we do on a day-to-day basis. This is obviously the Guggenheim Museum, and we do. We work with images. We work with art. We work, and we have the privilege of working in a beautiful Frank Lloyd Wright building. But actually, what we've been up to for the past almost 2 years in preparation is closer to this. We have been involved in this project that started by having to clean up the lot where you're currently sitting. Right now was this rat-infested lot that needed a lot of preparation to look like it looks today.
And a few of the trends that we analyzed, that's why this project started. Two trends that both started in the mid-90s, and the first one you see here. We were all interested in cities, and what we saw happening around us is many people started writing books with endless data, endless maps, and they all look beautiful. And in a way they should give us a sense, okay, everything is under control, we know what cities are about. We have no clue what cities are about, we feel. So that's why we looked at what was happening at that point. Many of those books ended up in exhibitions like this. Again, trying to do the same thing, show that we understand cities without really understanding cities. And then at that same point, also in the mid-90s, we see this happening. Completely different. So we go from the quantitative to the qualitative. On the one side, you have the historians, the sociologists, all collecting that data, and then on the other side, you get artists. This is Rickert Tirvanitja, who's one of our advisory members, and starting projects out in the country, often in rural landscapes, and trying to bring communities together in completely different settings, and trying to understand how people live there. So this is Rickert, but you see the same thing happening in Joshua Tree. Andrea Zattel started a project there where she was creating these spots that her friends could customize and live in. And then the last example you would get in Rotterdam, where I'm from. This is Joep van Lieshout, one of the most interesting artists probably in Holland. He proposed a whole free zone, a free state for the city of Almere. Of course, Almere said no to it, but he said, okay, I will do it in the port of Rotterdam. And that's where he created his own currency, his own legislative system, and so on. So this is what artists are doing at that point, whereas all of the other people are making books with maps and data. And then I like to make a jump to one of my former bosses, and he has come up already earlier tonight, which usually doesn't happen twice in an evening. But this is Stephen Hall, and usually when you would walk into Stephen's office, Stephen is an architect, and he would come with a question, he would always point you to the red square and say like, okay, David, this is totally unimportant, and you think it's important because it's urgent. If you have something for the yellow square, come back. And the yellow square is saying it's important, but it's not urgent. So what this is showing, it's actually a former colleague sitting here smiling now. What this is showing us is that we have to find some sort of a balance between things that seem super urgent and perhaps not always are, and give us a little bit of time to find the things that are really important. And that's what we've tried to set up with a lab.
So what David has shown you are these two general trends, the quantitative one, this mapping, sort of invasion of data, together with this other more qualitative aspect of things that we wanted to mix together here at the lab to look at cities from both points of view. Neither of them is very accurate, and neither of them brings a full picture. So the lab project was intending to bring those two things together. But to better understand why we're all here today, sitting at the lab and not in a place like this, which is the Prado Museum in Madrid, we have to look at the beginnings of museums and museums as institutions and how they have become these repositories of good taste and what culture and high-end culture should be. But they have a problem, museums like this, as much as we come from that culture and we are museum people after all. They can be big institutions like big cruise liners. They take, it's very difficult to make one of these cruise liners shift or be flexible or try to react very quickly to what's happening around them. So in a way, the lab is a response and a reaction to this model as well as a complement to it. It's not a substitute for it, it's a complement to it. So it's more of a lean, easily adaptable and changeable model that can move and change location. It responds to its surroundings by the actual programs that happen in it. When we opened the lab, we had programmed a series of events that were very orderly, organized in an Excel sheet. But as the lab started to advance, we were receiving requests to do programs. We had neighbors who came and proposed programs who wanted to present something at the lab. We had institutions that found it very interesting to be here, others that found it, that had a very critical point of view, but that wanted to be part of it. So suddenly it became this place where everyone wanted to have a say, and the actual structure allowed us some flexibility to do that. The lab travels to 3 cities. The first one is New York, where we are now. It will then go to Berlin and then to Mumbai, and at the end of it, we'll have an exhibition here in New York, gathering more of the conclusions of what has happened in those 3 cities. But the one topic that we're exploring is cities, and because this is our topic today, we wanted to use the lab to analyze cities, a little bit of their past and their present, and even possibly their future, and look at how cities have been looked at in the past, century. Oops, sorry. I don't know what's happening. Sorry. Why don't you go ahead?
Good. So what you get is three big moments, and first you get in this industrial revolution, the machine age starting, all being very excited about cities, and then a few decades later being all very upset about the conditions that we've created. Second situation would be roughly around the Second World War, and this is a beautiful shot of Andreas Gursky of the Corbeau building in Marseille. But nevertheless, many of these towers in the green over the past decades became the most impossible places to live in, as we now know. And then what we see happening over the past years are 2 trends related to responsiveness. The first one on the left. This is a responsive piece of architecture in Beijing, China, where the wall is responding to the environment around it. And initially, when we started this project, we thought, yeah, we should probably do something with responsive architecture. Never fully convinced about it, and I think we now know why, because what seems to be much more important is responsive communities. So that's what you see happening on the right, and it's quite a drastic shift that has happened in only a few years, in the past years.
So for us, it was a little bit of a realization that you really have to be of your own time. This is a very old quote, but incredibly still relevant today, about how there are things that belong to your own time, and how you have to be a little bit relevant with what you're doing with the historical time that you're living in. So just as for BMW, for instance, it was relevant in 2003 to be building a Zaha Hadid building. This is the BMW plant in Leipzig, built by big star architect Zaha in 2003. Incredibly relevant. But what's more relevant today is to be creating spaces, perhaps like the lab, that are very different and almost completely the opposite of what star architecture was trying to accomplish. So we're sitting in a building that is very non-iconic. It doesn't even have walls around it. So this means to be of your time. This means to be responsive to what's happening around you with the projects that you are creating from a museum or from an institution. We've also seen that just like people today are increasingly becoming ferocious multitaskers, institutions have to do so as well. Museums can no longer do only exhibitions, and they have to, being part of their own time, actually multitask as well. So physically, the structure that we're standing under is actually the perfect multitasker. We won't get a lot into the details of it, but just like you're sitting right now in this setting with the chairs, when we do a workshop, we take all of the chairs, we put them up in some of the cages that are actually standing above your heads. We bring down tables, and the space changes completely. So this space was made for multitasking. And in a way, we see the lab as a multitasker. So there's lots of things and lots of goals that the lab is trying to achieve. The lab is trying to address people sustainability, like David said, citizen participation as one of its main topics, that that affects integration. It's meant to work as a tool for citizen empowerment, to encourage ownership of your own cities, of your own neighborhoods, to try and change behavior. And also, it's also addressing issues like digital crowdsourcing and how to turn those into physical, real interactions. We've talked a lot about qualitative relationships, bottom-up approaches, observing certain situations, but not just staying at the observation phase, but actually acting and intervening. And it's also looking at how small interventions can have a very big impact.
And how we've structured this always through the theme of confronting comfort. For the people that have been here over the past 10 weeks, you've seen endless programs, it seems, at many points. Rosanna did a count of that this afternoon, and I think we almost counted up to 200, which is quite a decent number. And we organize this with a group of lab members. There's 5 of them for New York. Actually, one of them is still here with us, thankfully. It's Charles Montgomery, a writer from Canada who's writing about happy cities. Then we have 2 architects from Holland. They're mainly focused on gentrification issues. An inventor from Nigeria who's very strongly focused on waste and water management. And then the last one is Omar Freya from the Bronx. He's an activist, and his work is all focused on how to create worker cooperatives. Together they created a program, and it looked at the systems of the city. This slide that they've used a lot to both show the visible and invisible systems. And the task is now to us to see if we can somehow summarize what has happened over those past 10 weeks. And we think the message was, get urbanized, and this is a nice segue to the program tonight, where we'll be showing clips from the movie Urbanized. But get urbanized and try to enjoy it. And we have 5 points that seem to be the key points that have kept coming up in several iterations over the course of the lab. The first one, there's a need to encourage cooperative environments. And we saw this happening in many programs, but perhaps one of the most iconic ones was Omar's program, which was a workshop about how to create participatory budgeting processes. But then on the other hand, you see people like Ning, a curator from China, who came to explain his program for the Bishan community, which is a small town where he's trying to, instead of bring fancy architecture, big buildings in, what he's doing is bringing culture into the town in order to build a more coherent community. This is one of his movie nights. And then another jump would be to bring people together and actually understand our trash system. This was, of course, one of Bosun's programs. And he took people out into the neighborhood, and we looked at what is hidden in our trash cans. My personal favorite was really somebody that we met through our time in the neighborhood, called Dr. Dave. Dr. Dave is quite a fierce doctor, and he came with a proposal to build cooperative environments for healthcare, and he actually runs one of those. Quite interesting. He has roughly 500 people in the neighborhood that are part of his clinic. And he proposes a system that is related to FedEx, but he calls it MedEx. And it would be just as efficient, but it's all organized by ourselves. So we got programs like that popping up over the past weeks.
A second trend / recommendation that we noticed was a rise of the open source participatory urbanism. Open source, of course, has been happening for a while in a variety of fields, but not so much in urbanism. So we identified that as one of the trends happening. We had one of our advisory committees, Juliet Shore, come and give a talk some days ago, and she made a special emphasis on the rise of the sharing economy and sharing models, time banks, as something that is very strongly and quickly shaping cities and how we relate in them. We also had this program where where we got this explanation of the bike sharing program that's coming to New York next year, and you can actually vote where you want the bike stands to be. So as you see, everyone in New York City wants their bike stand to be immediately in front of their stoop. So again, another example of the crowdsourcing and open sourcing and how it actually will affect the way the city looks if the city and government officials listen to these recommendations. This is another program that we did as a series of programs called What's Next. These programs were looking at the future of this site where we're at right now and what's going to happen when the lab leaves. So one of them happened, and what participants were being asked to do is to actually write in this pieces of foam ideas for what they want to do in this, they want to have in this space. So we had the most varied responses, and we built it through a period of 2 days inside of the lab, and then it actually happened outside in the block party. We put the ideas outside there on the street, and everyone was responding to it. So again, another example of like direct involvement with your community and how it's shaped. This is one of the programs and experiments run by Charles with input from Colin Ellard as well on how you crowdsource information, but in this case it's about the emotional responses and the arousal responses in a city when you're crossing big highways or when you're walking in pedestrian areas, and this was all being data that was being inputted into Blackberries or iPhones. So again, another way to see how we can capture that data and get meaningful results from it. And the last example of programs, we did a program called the New York Leftover Bailout, and we had a group of squatters who came and explained to us how they get organized to squat, and it was a one-on-one on squatting. They are incredibly organized. They own 13 buildings. I don't remember how many.
17, I think.
17 in the neighborhood, and it was a very direct way to see also how they are physically taking over certain buildings and changing their meaning.
Then the third category that we identify is a need to promote a more emotional form of cityness. And cityness is a term coined by Saskia Sassen when she didn't want to use the conventional ways to describe cities anymore. So no urbanism, no urbanity, no urban planning, but cityness. And when we thought we had everything, Charles came 2.5 weeks ago and started a program called Love Night. I'm Dutch, we don't like to hug, but I hugged a lot of people that evening, so that was good. Then another program we did related to Charles, but actually we ran it over the course of the 10 weeks as a long-running experiment, is with Colin Ellard. Colin had groups of people go into the city once, twice a week to measure their levels of arousal. A similar program that Maria just described, but in this case it was really done for our lab. And then the last example that's in this category, also related to what Charles has been showing us. This is Bogota, Colombia, where Jill Peñalosa was trying to get people to communicate and interact much more. And it can be in very simple ways, as you see here. It doesn't always need to be over-the-top design.
A fourth repeating trend was the need to acknowledge what we're calling the chameleonic citizenship. We had Nicholas Humphrey here yesterday. He's a theoretical psychologist and gave a talk about chameleons and how they adapt to their environments. And we thought that this was one of the topics that had actually come up throughout the lab, the need to adapt as a person to your city when your city is not changing around you. One example of this is Soes. Soes are the two architects from Holland who opened the first 2 weeks of the lab, and they showed us this example where they were looking at the outskirts of Paris, the banlieue of Paris, and they noticed this situation where there was a very big Walmart-type supermarket, and on the opposite side, a housing project, and they noticed that there was this area in between that was becoming really dangerous. There was a total disconnect between these two groups, and they thought that they needed to actuate in that in-between space. So what they proposed was to actually create what they were calling the hyperlieu, a mix between the banlieue and the hypermarché, like both things together, to actually make that space a livable area. So to eliminate the danger, bring people to take it, and eliminate all the problems that were being created in there. And actually what ended up happening as an example of this way that you have to adapt as a person to your surrounding environment when it doesn't work, work is that the owner of the hypermarché saw that the people that were living in the housing projects were not responding very well to the supermarket structure, which was, I'm guessing, a Whole Foods type thing, perhaps less glossy and nice looking than the Whole Foods. But he saw that people wanted a market space that was closer to the ones that they probably have in their original country. So they were offered to create little stands rather than having this typical supermarket environment. Another example of this chameleonic way of adapting to places. This is one of the programs led by Spurs, where they led a tour to go out into the New Jersey Meadowlands, and again, looking at all of this infrastructure that supports our city, but that has become problematic in different ways. So how do you adapt? How do you learn about that infrastructure to change your own behavior in the city? And how it's important to understand the existence of this infrastructure to actually, when you're switching your light in your kitchen, understand where things are coming from and understand how you can change certain behaviors. And lastly, we had the game. Usually where you're standing, there is a game called Urbanology. This is a game that was developed by the lab team as a response to this idea of the systems that they wanted to analyze. The game is a symbol of the different systems that run cities. So as you see, it has different tokens: affordability, livability, sustainability, transportation, and wealth. And by collective decision making, each person gets a token and is asked a series of questions. You can get to shape your own city. So we saw that people were actually changing their minds when they were playing this game by having to work together and making decisions about their own ideal city.
And then the last category would be a need to retrofit urban life. You probably already sense this coming. What we have learned over the past 10 weeks, it's not so much about big design solutions, grand schemes, but more about how you can create smaller changes in the city around you that can actually have a very big impact. First example was Saskia Sassen, who was here to speak about hacking the city. And she gave us an example that is not necessarily urban in the conventional sense, but she said, okay, if you look at oil platforms, perhaps we can do different things with it. And she had a ton of these examples. Then on a much more doable level, we saw examples as from June Williamson, who spoke about what you can do with suburbia. And in this case, you see the little black house in the center there. Normally there would be no house in the backyard, but it would be much more interesting, of course, to get to a more dense landscape. There's many benefits that result from that. Then Christian and Elma, the architects from Holland that we've worked with, they've showed us in numerous iterations this building in Rotterdam. Actually, I used to bike by this every morning. But this is an old empty office building that was supposed to be broken down, and they said we can do something more interesting with it because you have no money to put up a new building, and let's see what we can do. So they started a series of projects inside, and this is all in English actually. It's good. So it's a combination of different programs from culture and science to research studios and so on. And they run this as a cooperative, which is interesting, especially in the Dutch context, where it doesn't happen that often. Then we did programs here in the lab where you could make your own, create your own ideas with a 3D printer system. But we also looked at examples like these from Charles. This is in Portland, where people realized that it was all fine in suburbia, but it was not totally fine. So what could happen if you start creating things like this? And I must say, it looks totally ugly, of course. And that's kind of interesting about this whole trend, that it doesn't need to be pretty anymore, or not aesthetically pleasing. And what happened here is that people really started coming together. And then a last example that we often see in Charles's case is what happens if the city starts retrofitting itself. This is Bogota in Colombia, where they developed a rapid bus system, very popular around the world. And this image is slightly, well, it's not entirely right, I think, because there's a traffic accident happening here apparently. But nevertheless, it shows that what can happen if a city starts retrofitting itself. The people in the bus get to places very quickly. How we would summarize it, the 5 points.
So again, these are the 5 points, 5 main ideas that we thought were really coming through: the need to encourage cooperative environments, the rise of open source participatory urbanism, a need to promote emotional cityness, a need to acknowledge the chameleonic changing citizenship, and a need to retrofit urban life. So what we've been doing today, we run a little experiment today with everyone that was in the audience since this morning through tonight. It's actually still going on right now. And we wanted to show you, and perhaps I think I'm going to need Janelle's help here to jump in a second. We wanted to show you what we've been doing with this experiment. But what we think is that these 5 topics and other subtopics that have emerged during the last 10 weeks actually have the potential to spread out in a sort of like a ripple effect way.
Yeah,
These ideas can be larger than themselves if people take them up and if local governments take them up as well. So we'll show you in a second the little experiment that we did. It was actually developed by our colleague Paul Christophe. I don't know if Paul is around, right there. He developed this amazing software that we thought we had to use for tonight. So what we did through the run of the day is that we had programs running all day that were concluding sessions, and we actually had people running around with iPads in their hands, and they were recording the words that were being more repeated in each of these programs and how they fit into those 5 categories that we just identified as the main topics of the lab. And what you're about to see in a second when it comes up in the screen is how many of the words that were happening here in formal and informal conversations in the lab actually fit into those categories. We haven't even seen ourselves the results. This can be a total fiasco if some of the words didn't actually fit into those categories. But the idea is to see like whether these topics are really being discussed and whether there are words that came up that were relevant to each of them. And it's of course a game on nomenclature and words, and many of the words will actually fit into several categories, but it will give us a visual idea of the conversations that happened here today. Okay, here we go. So these are a lot of the words that came up in conversations today, throughout the day. And they're all sort of like messed up together here. They don't really have much of an identity. But we started grouping them into categories. So one of the first ones was retrofitting urban life, was the first big bucket that we had as one of our topics. And the little color bubbles that you see happening are all the words that came up today in programs that were actually relevant to retrofitting urban life. We have public space, public benefit, intervention. The number under each word indicates how many times that term was repeated today, since we started at around 11. We started? Yeah, 11. The next bubble was emotional cityness, which seems to be a big hit. So this one was more, oops, I don't know what happened. This one obviously was dealing more with the emotional, the side of things, the well-being, what Charles was talking about. So we have words like, let's see, interaction, behavior, meditation, trust, response. We had neuroscience in there, tension. The next big category was the participatory environments. So the open source idea that we talked about a minute ago. So I see that some of the words coming up are community, collaboration, conversation, local and global, and it's moving way too fast for me to read it. And then the last one was the cooperative environments and chameleonic citizenship. So I think, okay, so our experiment failed. We need to rephrase the chameleonic citizenship term because I don't think it's clear enough. Obviously, not a lot of people knew what that meant, but we do have adaptation, which is relevant to it, gentrification, change, life infusing, and then in the cooperative environments, decision making, participation, engaging, So this is just a little example of how we see the lab developing a little more. Today was the first day that we did this, but the idea of the lab is to keep looking into these trends, keep looking into what are the topics that cities actually want to talk about, and identify them, and sometimes by trial and by error see that some of them perhaps might not be that relevant or need to be recoined. And we hope to keep doing that through the next labs. And I think we'll wrap it up here, and thank you for being here tonight.